Hello viewers, welcome to the session. Today the topic of our discussion is climate change and economic impact. We have seen in the previous sessions that how climate change impacts agriculture, leads to extreme weather events and also has an impact on society. Today we will be discussing about the economic impact of climate change. Today climate change is considered to be one of the greatest threats to economic stability. It is predicted that because of increasing temperature, there will be economic losses and the world's GDP will be reducing by several percentage because there are costs associated with the climate change, which is a reality now. Because warmer temperatures, increase in sea level, extreme weathers, all this will lead to damage to property and infrastructure. It will impact human health and productivity. It has a negative influence on various important sectors such as agriculture, forestry, fisheries, tourism and so on. So, in wake up of all these things, there is an increased demand of energy because at the current rate, the fossil fuels which we are using today, they already have a negative effect on the environment. They lead to environmental pollution, and because of the diminishing natural resources, there is an absence of efficient power generation systems. So, there are certain sectors of the economy which are badly hit because of climate change taking place. And according to a survey that was done in 2017 by independent economists, it has been revealed that the effect of climate change which is happening today, it will be leading to from around 2% to 10%, there will be reduced GDP every year. So, it is all because of the climate related cost. There are costs associated for breaking up, for managing the infrastructure again, and also there are certain factors that are related to extreme weather events, natural disasters taking place, impact on agricultural fields, particularly the stresses to low lying areas because of sea level rise happening. So, when there are costs associated, there is a large consequence that there will be reduced GDP happening, and this is a point of concern where already we are struggling with the economy which is at stake because of so many other factors taking place. So, this has a market and non-market impact, particularly related to climate change, we can say. What is a market impact? Means these are linked to market transactions and they are directly affecting the GDP. For example, because of climate change, the availability, the procurement of raw materials is affected, access to energy is denied at several places, groundwater extraction takes a cost, settlement of refugees, for example, which are there because of the natural disasters taking place. So, these are the impact which are directly affecting the market and they are linked to market transactions. But more worrisome is the non-market impacts of climate change. They are the impacts which happen to the human beings, health of the human beings, well-being of the human beings, the ecosystem's health, the environmental conditions which are there, the culture of the people also when they move from one place to another. So, that also has a stake. So, there are the non-market impacts of climate change also, which also is a concern nowadays, because for a healthy economy, the healthy ecosystems, the healthy environment is a must. So, the sectors whose economy will be most affected are agriculture, infrastructure, human health and well-being, the productivity. Tourism sector is badly affected because of the changed economy happening because of climate change, and business and the financial markets. But there is a growing dilemma regarding economic impact and climate change, because the benefits of policy action, whatever we are taking because of climate change, they are mostly uncertain and they will be definitely for the future generation. But the cost of those policies, they are actually running the risk of being more immediate and more extensive. And at the same time, it has also been revealed that the cost of inaction, they are mostly irreversible, potentially catastrophic, and they are likely to hit the poorer countries more as compared to the developed ones. So, because of these factors, we must understand now that climate change is an externality. We know that like any other externality, the emitter of the greenhouse gases does not bear the cost of emitting those gases, those pollutants into the atmosphere. And another point is that there is no motivation for the emitter to include these costs in decision making. So, first of all, the developed nations or the big industrialists who are emitting the greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, they are not bearing the cost of doing so. And further, there is no motivation for them to reduce the release of these greenhouse gases, and further the market which is existing at present, it does not also address the problem in a more social optimal manner. And therefore, it proves the point that climate change is a unique externality. Why is it so? Because the emission of greenhouse gases which are taking place at present, they impose the cost on others, particularly not the emitter. So, the poorer are affected, the developing nations are affected, and these costs are felt over a long period of time. It is not a short term process. It is not a short duration cost, you can say. So, it is there for a very long period of time, and there is also the fact that it is not limited only to the place where the emissions have taken place. So, it affects the entire world, and the exact nature of the cost which is being calculated by the economic models, that is also uncertain, because it is mainly shaped by the policies at present, by the market mechanisms, the people's participation, and so on. So, at present we are not in a position to know what will be the cost of climate resilient buildings that we are making at present. And it is also proven that because of climate change related economy coming up, the future generations will be most affected. Whether there is an access to water, whether it is the agricultural crops, whether it is the rising food prices, it is the future generations, they are the most affected, but at present they do not have any opinions, any decision making in all this. Because whatever is happening today to our atmosphere, to our environment, to our economy, to our products at present, that has an impact after maybe say 10 years or 20 years from now. So, it is the future generations which will be affected the most, and therefore, there is no motivation, no clarity regarding the emissions. The emitter is not aware of what will be the cost that will be there because of the present actions taking place. Here we must mention about the Stern review. Stern is an economist in British in 2006, and for the first time the impact of environment on economy was studied, and he highlighted the fact that there is a need to reinvest the equivalent for around 2% of global GDP. We need to invest to mitigate the impact of climate change taking place. And it is one of the significant contribution by an economist to see that what are the environmental consequences of climate change and how does it affect the GDP, and how much of the GDP we must put aside for mitigating the impact of climate change which are taking place at present. And he emphasized that the size and nature of the economic consequences depends upon the magnitude and rate of change taking place. How variable are the extreme events, and what are the mitigation and adaptation practices are in place in a particular country. So, by calculating all these things, we can say that what are the economic consequences, and on the basis of the suitable models, we can predict and we can judge how much of the investment is required in the area of climate change. Then in 2018, American economist William D. Nordis, he received the Nobel Prize in economics for integrating climate change into long-term macroeconomic analysis. And what did he say is that the solution to climate change is to have those prices that discourage the use of fossil fuels, which we are using nowadays in a large manner. because at present it is cheaper and it is no motivation to use the alternative forms of energy or the renewable forms of energy. So, he put forward the idea that some prices should be put for the usage of these fossil fuels to see that how the climate change we are able to bring down the emissions, that we have to put a cap on the release of the gases and we need to put a kind of a price to the climate change related greenhouse gases being emitted into the atmosphere. And he developed an interesting model called the Dynamic Integrated Climate Economy model, which we refer to as DICE model, which integrates economics, carbon cycle, climate science and impacts associated with the changes taking place, and it also shows that what are the benefits of taking suitable steps in this direction so that the climate change can be slowed down. So, by these observations, learners, you must have studied and you must have known by now that the economics of climate change, the studies related to all these issues is gaining momentum, because increasingly it has been felt that the impact of climate change on economy is severe. So, there are notable effects. For example, food prices are rising. We are worried about the increase in the food prices, how the poor are going to afford, because with extremely hot days, agriculture is badly affected, not only because of rise in temperature, but also because of the changes in the weather patterns, the precipitation patterns. Somewhere it is raining heavily, at some places it does not rain at all. The area which was once flooded is now becoming a drought-like region. So, because of that, the agriculture is badly affected, and therefore, the food prices of the grains, of the food crops, vegetables, it is increasing. Similarly, the prices of beef, milk, poultry, this also goes up, and studies have also found that because of global warming taking place, because of the warming of the oceans, the global fish yields have reduced significantly, and because of the losses in the aquatic resources, there is also an increase in demand, and ultimately the prices of these also increases to a large extent. And similarly, if we talk about the agriculture, it is also dependent upon the type of the crop, the type of the location, because the coastal areas, the mountainous areas, they are the ones which are mostly badly affected by the climate change related weather phenomena when it is taking place. Similarly, apart from that, there is a threat to the national security also because of climate change, because it increases the frequency, the scale and complexity of the future defense missions, because of the changes, because of the hurricanes, because of the cyclones, because of the disasters taking place, there is temporary and permanent flooding of the airports. Mostly the coastal areas are at risk because major military installations, critical infrastructure is there, and it is affected by the sea level rise. Migration is one of the important phenomena which is taking place because of climate change. People are migrating from the coastal areas, from the drought stricken farmlands where there are extreme weather conditions, and it has been predicted that by 2050 there will be as many as 1 billion climate refugees, because events like drought, shifting rain patterns, extreme weather, it destroys the crops, the livelihoods of the people, the food insecurity prevails, and therefore people migrate from one place to another. The migration of the people is not just a physical movement of people from one place to another, but also it brings with it other socio-cultural changes in the communities, which is also a point of concern. These are migrants who have moved from one place to another, and they suffer, you can say they are marginalized, they suffer exploitation, they live in extreme poverty, and this is something which is another important point of study and concern also. Then employment opportunities, you can say that according to World Employment and Social Outlook 2018, it has been estimated that 1.2 billion jobs are directly dependent upon the healthy and sustainable management of the environment. Because of climate change taking place, because of the forest being cut down because of the rivers which are dried up. People are losing jobs, they are earning less, because natural disasters also reduce the working capacity of the people. And on the other hand, when we make the efforts to combat climate change, there is a creation of 24 million new jobs by 2035. And it clearly indicates that there are more avenues coming up in green economy, in climate resilient agriculture, you can say, infrastructure, tourism, so many types of new jobs coming up, and therefore it directly affects the economy in a given region. So there is a transition to low carbon green economy which will amplify the jobs in environmental friendly production processes, outputs, and other jobs may be at risk, particularly in sectors which have fewer options for transition towards a more sustainable ways of production. Then insurance is also one of the important considerations which is hit by climate change, because consistently high cost related to extreme weather threatens to make insurance very expensive for most of the people, and insurance companies, they continue to experience significant costs related to increasingly common extreme weather patterns. So that is also has a bearing on the economics. And GDP, we have already talked about that the negative effects of climate change are expected to be an ongoing drag on the global gross domestic product. The climate change is going to reduce world's GDP several percent, and it is also for sure that at present if we invest 1% of GDP now, for the next maybe for 10 years or 20 years, we will be able to avoid losing 20% of GDP later, maybe after 40 years or 50 years. So that makes an important consideration here, that we should think about investing more towards climate friendly practices, processes, manufacturing and other important considerations, so as to make a good economic growth in the years to come. Similarly, energy, you can say extreme weather events are affecting energy production as well, energy transportation, transmission, distribution infrastructure, and maybe in the high summer temperatures definitely it increases the energy use and it causes high summer peak loads. So that is also a point of concern where we are worried about the energy you can say energy crisis which is going to come. And in a layman terms, we normally see that during summers and all, there is a scarcity of energy sources happening because of impact of climate change on the natural resources. So what can we do? What individuals, business, governments can do to protect themselves is a question that we need to ask ourselves, because climate change comes with uncertainty, ambiguity. First of all, we need to mitigate global greenhouse gas emissions, and on the other hand, we need to adapt also. So when we focus our studies on the public sector cost, adaptation may put a strain on the government budgets, particularly in the developing countries, because they have the weak adaptation capacity and they may be severely affected by the climate change. So carbon pricing is one of the important tool which may be taken into consideration, because in carbon pricing the cost of carbon emissions is included in the pricing of carbon emitting goods. It results in reduced emission based activities, number one, and secondly it promotes, it gives incentives to find non-emitting alternatives. So when we price the cost of carbon emissions, it can help to mitigate the impact of climate change. Then the pricing can be in the form of taxes or carbon trading. Taxes are important because it creates revenues, and on the other hand, it does not directly control the amount of emissions. For example, you can understand this in this way, that carbon taxes has an advantage because there is another mechanism called cap and trade schemes, that is carbon trading. So because it results in stable prices for emissions, and it is critical for firms so that they can make long term decisions and they may invest in low emission technologies. And it also helps to generate revenues, because by virtue of which we can enhance the efficiency and equity. However, under carbon taxes, the quantity of emissions reduction is uncertain because it cannot be put on sure that how much of the emissions will be reduced by taxing carbon emissions. So, carbon trading is another method because every country has a cap on the amount of carbon they are allowed to release. So, when carbon emissions trading, when we do carbon trading, that is cap and trade, it allows the countries that have the higher carbon emissions to purchase the right to release more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, and this they are taking from the countries that have lower carbon efficiency. So, it is an efficient mechanism and it directly controls the amount of emissions, but on the other hand, it does not create revenue. So, we must go for low carbon economy because it brings challenges to competitiveness and also opportunities for growth. And when we go for policy to reduce emissions, it should be based on 3 elements particularly. Carbon pricing is an effective method and carbon trading, and also government support is needed for low carbon and energy efficient technologies. So, there are disadvantages of taxes mechanism for trading mechanisms. So, hybrid policies can also provide for a simultaneous targeting of emission prices at one hand, so that for the short term we can price, and emission levels also we can check for the long run. So, hybrid policies can be adopted. And government budgets must encourage adaptation expenditures, social safety nets that must be strengthened, and external financing may be used. For example, the poor countries whose carbon emissions levels are more as compared to the other countries, maybe. So, you can go for external financing to see that how we are able to mitigate the impact of climate change. So, policy instruments are many. For example, tax based incentives, we just spoke about the soft loans which may be provided for building suitable infrastructure or making some giving some subsidies in agriculture or groundwater exploitation, or public education is very important. Command and control in the form of legislation, policies, they have an important role to play. Adaptation strategies, because investing more in research and development, investing more in hard and soft engineering, understanding the national, regional and the global implications of climate change, that is also very important. So, by virtue of all these factors, we can see that how we can reduce the emission of greenhouse gases and how we can see that climate change comes to a halt. Apart from this, there are other measures which can be taken up to build a more resilient and proper growth model for people. For example, energy systems can be decarbonized. We can go for digitized electrification technologies. Urban development can be made more sustainable so that we can have compact, coordinated and connected cities. Suitable changes are required to be made in land use, farming methods. For example, going back to the traditional methods of farming and relying less on the artificial methods for industrial farming. All these are posing a threat to the release, posing a threat to the or measures towards mitigating the impact of climate change. Water management is very essential in agricultural, industrial and domestic sectors. Going for circular economy is very important because it is required to have an efficient use of products, because with the increasing waste generation, take for example the plastic, when we are throwing it away, it is an economic loss. So, efforts and mechanisms should be strengthened so that we can have a kind of you can say circular economy, where we are able to make use of the products which are being thrown away at present. So, putting a price on carbon, and companies and organizations must disclose the climate related financial risk so that it is accounted for. Looping in of the private sector is very important because they also have an important role to play. People's participation cannot be ignored. So, by all these methods we can see and by proper collaboration, proper monitoring, proper role played by the different stakeholders in the society, we will be able to see and how the economic impacts of climate change can be mitigated, because this is one of the important area which affects one and all. So, in a nutshell, we can say that climate change has an impact on the economy. This impact can be minimized, or the adverse effects can be minimized by suitable policies so as to reduce the emission of greenhouse gases, and well framed, well designed policies are required so that the economic cost what we are bearing today is manageable. It is very much understandable that climate change is real, it is an emergency. It not only affects the environment and the biodiversity and the social system, but also it affects the economy, and economy in turn affects our living, our the way of living, and our health also to a great extent. Thank you.